Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And I spoke with Cameron on the phone yesterday. We were going over topics we might be interested in talking about. And he said he just went through a massive experience with Grass Tetany. So you want to share what happened there, Cam?
Yeah, definitely. When we're thinking about topics, certainly, or what the goal of, delivering this to the public is using some of our own, I guess, experiences or issues we've faced to then try to share with others so that they may not run into that same issue. Um, so yeah, was there recently, and yeah, I'd mentioned to you, probably wouldn't have caught it as early as we did, except went out into the field to put a grazing muzzle there on our uh, guard donkey so that he wouldn't founder, try to limit his intake. And I'm walking through the field and I see a ewe that's kind of limping on her front end. Most of the ewes were laying there because I wasn't right up on him quite yet. And so this ewe gets up and she's kind of hobbling on her front end. Her feet almost look to be tender. Um, and it's like, well, maybe she's got some scald. We don't have foot rot or haven't really dealt with scald here in the past, but on the Katahdin side of things. But we've had some rain. It's been a little wet. So thought I'd try to grab her. And I'm watching her run. I'm like, that is just not normal. It's not even like a limp. It's like a uh, just a loss of um, coordination on her front end. And once I get a hold of her and start to look it over, of course, there's nothing wrong with the hoof, and the rest of the group gets up, and I notice probably another 8 to 10 that get up are kind of walking side to side, swaying, leaning up against each other in that group of sheep as they're walking forward. And there's one ewe over in the corner leaning up against a brace post. And I've got three other ewes laying down, didn't even get up until you got right up on them. And I'd mentioned to Dad, and I think to you on the phone there the other day, at least I wasn't happy about the situation. Certainly a topic we've talked about in the past is being present with those sheep and educating yourself so that when an issue arises where you have eyes on those sheep, you're able to diagnose it, or you at least know that it's not normal.
Mhm.
And so right then, like, well, that looks like grass tetany. I've given enough kind of forage talks, grazing talks, that when we're talking about common diseases or issues surrounding grazing animals, grazing livestock, grass tetany's on that list. And
Yeah.
so knew right then what it was. Um, again, we've never dealt with it in the past, and I think some of the events leading up to this that we'll go into greater detail, they start to connect the dots to why we ran into that issue. And so certainly didn't want to just hop on here and say, everybody watch your sheep because it's coming. And that's not the case. So, there's certainly um, some management issues that kind of all aligned to produce this. I will say that, you know, as of today, and this would have happened, 3 or 4 days ago, I haven't lost anything. So,
Good.
um, so yeah, like I said, if nothing else, just knowing that you need to lay eyes on those animals and educate yourself to know what to look for. So again, when we're thinking about grass tetany, and I guess more common name would be grass staggers, and so that I will tell you now from personal experience that staggering behavior would be kind of behavior number one that you should look for. Um, if they're uneasy, loss of coordination. What's kind of interesting, and we've dealt with some listeriosis before, dealt with some meningeal worm before. So though grass tetany is a has some neurologic effect. They're very different symptoms than what those other two would be. So, those other two, you might see some circling, some stargazing, and this was not uh, quite that severe. It's almost a more, again, in this example, almost a more like overly alert behavior. So they'll throw their head back, and that's the best way I can describe. Um, when being an Ohio State alumni, uh, when you see someone in the band or they go out to dot that I, and they're high kicking those legs out to dot the I. That's what
Mhm.
this U was doing. Just throwing those front feet out ahead of her, and then her head was back, and so those ears were somewhat down. So it's got some neurological uh, components to it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, uh, we're talking about a mineral imbalance is all grass tetany is. And so, in that mineral that is imbalanced or the one that we're lacking is magnesium. Um, and so that's a hypo magnesemia that that's the issue. And so the first thing that we did or I did out there in the field was called my vet, um, found some treatment online, some from some peer-reviewed sources, um, for some injectable magnesium, and gave him a call. I'm probably overreacting because, again, it's an issue that I've talked on, heard about, and know that rapid treatment is absolutely essential. And so, my local vet, his initial uh, protocol and treatment was for a oral dose of um, CMPK. And by no means am I a veterinarian or offering veterinary advice. Certainly work with those individuals that you guys have relationships with. Um, but on the preparedness side of things, I know when we discussed this topic, Tom, uh, you went out and bought a couple of over the counter remedies in order to be prepared if you saw this issue as we're starting to put ewes out on grass. And so that CMPK gel, it comes in a like tube that you would then administer out of, offering calcium, magnesium, potassium, um, and phosphorus. And so, that was one option, and I wasn't terribly pleased with that, I guess, uh, plane of treatment. And so then called another vet that we use for some other stuff, and similar response on the injectable magnesium side of things. And then thought, third time's a charm, better safe than sorry. Called up our university vet uh, there at Ohio State. So again, regardless of where you're listening from, certainly that's kind of uh, the path that I would suggest is, if you're not terribly happy with what you hear the first time, seek out other advice. If it's similar, you can probably stop. Uh, but you are the owner caretaker for that animal, so at the end of the day, it's your responsibility. And so it wasn't that I didn't trust what he had to say, and ultimately that's what we ended up utilizing for our treatment protocol. But just wanted second opinions, just like if you or I were to go to the doctor and um, didn't like didn't like what we heard. So, talking with that vet, I believe her name is Dr. Kiefer, there and based out of Columbus. Um, it was a similar response that she had, similar form of treatment, which I was pleased that it was as simple as what it was,
Mhm.
because again, if all we're doing is hopping onto Google and reading the first negative thing we find, the outlook can be bleak.
Yeah.
So, uh, her response was, "We're in a mineral imbalance situation. We need to provide magnesium," and so, uh, in order to do that, it doesn't necessarily matter how we deliver that magnesium as long as we're getting it in. So her suggestion was utilizing a laxative that they use in veterinary medicine that I believe again is over the counter. It's just delivering that mineral source to those animals, and I believe that was called Magnalax,
Yeah, that's what it is.
and is relatively inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what kind of put my mind at ease is, again, it wasn't an emergency situation, and like I said, we caught it early, um, because kind of the path that it takes. We're dealing with a neurological symptom. They have a lack of magnesium. You see those neurological signs, and then they can eventually run into a coma situation. If you find them in that coma situation, the treatment or recovery rate is very low,
Yeah.
very poor,
Yep.
just like many of our other our other issues we might
Yep.
run into. Um, and so, that was helpful. We pulled them off of that pasture and, put some dry hay in front of them in still had grass in there, but in a more dry lot type environment, where we could keep eyes on them, pull them off of that forage, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's caused when we're thinking, and probably should have started there, but with grass tetany, it's caused by a rapid growing forage. And for us here in Ohio, Pennsylvania, kind of this mid Atlantic region, there's kind of two periods of time that we're going to see that. And that would be early spring, in that shorter vegetation that's rapidly growing, especially this time of year. And then possibly in the fall, as those cool season grasses start to take off. And really, what it is this consuming of, or the concentration of consumption out on pasture are short, like 4 to 6 inch grasses that are rapidly growing. In this rapid growth in that forage is low in magnesium, high in nitrogen, high in potassium. And so when we're thinking about high in nitrogen, the big thing that we think about from a nutrition standpoint is that equals increased crude protein.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're thinking about shorter forages, or those younger, more tender, more palatable forages, we tend to think that it's a positive thing. And it is from a protein sense, but that's limiting our magnesium uptake and maybe even some ability to, I shouldn't say uptake, but magnesium availability in that forage.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other things that once we're in the body in terms of, um, just mineral transfer from the rumen to those other storage areas that are affected by potassium that we're not going to talk about in depth today. But I did pull some interesting facts out that when you're thinking about magnesium and where it's stored in the body, that's not necessarily one that we think about like being on the big list of things to focus
Mm-hmm.
uh, on our mineral packs. So there's probably more of a risk. Well, and there is not probably there is more of a risk when we're thinking about calcium and magnesium, and similar to that CMPK gel that I mentioned before would be a treatment that we'd see in milk fever, and we know that's a, a similar imbalance with calcium. And so when we think about grass tetany, dealing with it in older animals that maybe don't have um, the bone stores or the storage of those minerals in that bone material to pull from, uh, like some of our younger animals do, and uh, animals that are lactating, that are pulling those minerals out in order to accomplish lactation. So, a lot of the cattle stuff, when we think about it on the cattle side of things, uh, that spring calving window puts us right in line with that spring flush of
Yep.
forage here in the mid Atlantic and parts in the Midwest. And so we're pretty eager to pull cows off, and sheep for that matter too. Pull those off of stored forage, pull them off of a round bale. Stuff's greening up, and um, if I don't have to feed hay, probably not going to.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
right, and so if we've got a cow or a ewe now that's in that lactation phase, um, they're pulling additional requirements for magnesium and calcium as well. So that's kind of a perfect storm there, just time of year that it falls on. Um,
So is this is the type of thing that does not affect lambs, or just not as often?
it, yeah, I think it could affect lambs. That's a good question. They're not as susceptible to it as what our mature ewes would be.
Yeah, I
Um,
did a bit of research after talking to you, and
yeah,
I didn't find anything that mentioned lambs. It was pretty much lactating ewes and usually older ewes.
right, right. Yeah, and so when we're thinking about where just magnesium is stored um, in the body, most of that magnesium, about 65 to 70%, is stored in the bone. We've got another 15% stored in the muscle, and then another 15% stored in other soft tissues. When we think about excretion and how that's leaving the body, certainly through milk that's being digested or ingested by our young animals, through the urine, we're seeing magnesium loss, uh, fecal loss, and then our rumen intake, or what the rumen can actually absorb and pass on. Um, you know, we're we're looking right around 10 to 30 grams of magnesium per day, and
Mm.
so we can't necessarily go out there and give 100 grams and and expect it to take off. Uh, but certainly can get enough in them. They can absorb enough on a daily basis to combat this mineral imbalance. So, um, yeah, I guess I could share some of the compounding issues that led into this, if that would be helpful.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a set of ewes. We've got a piece of ground that heavily infested with um, some noxious weeds that we'd like to turn over and use, some of what we've talked about in the alternative forage side of things, uh, this coming summer to kind of renovate and rejuvenate that pasture ground. And my thought is, I need to get as much out of that ground as possible. So I've got grass out there that's 6 to 8 inches tall. Um, that's in there with the thistle and our other weed species, and would like those ewes to start there because I'd like to go in and plant some forage soybeans earlier rather than later because of the weather that we're seeing there in central Ohio. And so we'll start our grazing there to maximize the utilization on that ground because I'm going to let it lay for 45 to 60 days for that soybean to grow.
Yep.
And it's out of my pasture rotation at that point.
Hmm.
And so, it's got to run overtime, before the at the start of the grazing season.
Yeah.
Um, and so, we've seen an increase in temperature here, here as of late because it's that time of year. Our cool season grasses are coming up. Every time we go out and look, I feel like that grass is growing, and
Yep.
it's encouraging to see. So, piece of ground, relatively short forage, mostly grass, and that part's important because when we think about magnesium content or mineral content and just rate of growth, uh, there's less. The research shows that there's less issue with grass tetany in pastures with higher legume
Yeah.
content, because we don't see that bolt of growth and that
Hmm.
loss of magnesium availability in those legume species. So anyway, got those ewes out on that, turned them out. Um, it would have been probably Friday, Saturday, um, to that pasture area, and this was the first time that they'd been out on grass full time. And so, had been running them out of the barn again, getting that rumen kind of buffered and ready to go on some forage that was again predominantly grass during those daytime hours the week prior. And that week prior, probably, I guess I could have had a timeline put up here. About 4 days before we had them out on, could have been 5 days before we put them out on pasture full time, ran out of mineral. And so it'd been keeping the mineral going to these sheep. Misjudged where our consumption was going to be, and our feed order didn't come in until that Thursday or Friday. So picked up my 10 bags of mineral to get me through so I don't run out again over the next coming months. And so got that mineral into them, filled the feeder up, mineral feeder up, put them out on that grass full time, like I said, that weekend. And then it was early that following week that I spotted the staggering.
Yep.
So it was a very quick turnaround, and I'd argue they're probably going into that situation deficient in magnesium. So
because you were out of minerals for a week or so.
Exactly. And so again, was placing, and these are open dry ewes at this point, had been weaned for 2-3 weeks now. And so when we think again the role that lactation has, depending on what that hay test shows, and I need to go back and look to see what the magnesium content was at the hay we were feeding, they could have been at a deficient state or just a very low-lying state of magnesium for the tail end of their lactation. And so again, we've got a later group going into the barn to lamb here, and so put preference on or priority on feeding mineral to those. It's like, I know I'm going to run out. The truck's not going to get here till the end of next week. My ewes that are going to lamb any day now need it.
Yep.
The ewes that are open, we can get by. At least that was the thought process. We can get by until that truck shows up. And again, it wasn't like they had been sitting there without it for a month. It was a very short period. And so again, not that it's fun to share all of these shortcomings in management, but if it helps somebody else notice an issue or a possible or potential issue down the road, then it's worthwhile.
Well, that's how you learn.
It is. Yes, it is.
And it's something you definitely learn from your own mistakes, and that's a bonus if you can learn from someone else's.
Exactly. And certainly, again, you've talked about it, you've never seen it, but then you see it and you're like, well, not doing that again. And like I said, we were fortunate to have eyes on those animals and get them treated and turned around quickly, so that we haven't seen an issue from it from a death loss standpoint. So anyway, I guess what's telling in that, when we're thinking about like forage or grass that's getting maybe a little washy, if you hear that term, or forage that's just very, very high moisture content. When we look at water consumption on those ewes in a 5-day period, didn't touch the water trough.
They didn't need water.
They didn't need water.
They were getting all the water out of that washy grass.
Yep, and they needed magnesium really badly. Yeah. So, but it's just interesting to think that there's that much liquid.
Yep.
There is that much water content in this early growth, and something like we all know or are aware of. But there's a number of ewes out there, and again, it's not like they had to go a distance for water. It's right there beside them. And so it's, that to me, I think is shocking all the time, or will be every time, that because you and I, like, could we consume enough, vegetative fruits and vegetables to not take a drink of water?
No, I don't think it'd be possible.
No, exactly. And it's a crude comparison, but it's just something to think about. Um,
It's funny. You told me about this. I don't know that I would have figured it out. I really don't. As long as I've raised cattle, every spring you get these beef magazines, and there's at least one article in there about Grass Tetany. And
mm,
I've just kind of skimmed over them through the years because we've never had an issue with it.
right.
And
When I
I didn't
think,
even think about it in sheep.
yeah,
And I'm
and
thinking
it's
about it
one of
now. Yeah, we got
right.
off the phone. I got right on the computer, got some stuff
Yep.
ordered in. So we'll have this on hand if we run into this issue.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, if you look at some of and it's some dated literature, but animals showing clinical signs of it,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's about 1 out of 3 that, perish from it, so
Yeah.
that don't survive. The biggest thing, everything you read is if you can catch them 4 to 8 hours after they exhibit symptoms, you can usually pull them out of it or change some things um to not lose those animals. So and you're right, a lot of the um just open access data and information is cattle based.
Yeah.
So what was kind of frustrating for me, it's like, well, if I want to do this, if I want to be really prepared for it in the future, obviously don't let my mineral run out or order enough to just have 10 bags around all the time. And that's probably what we're going to be doing. But you start to look, there are numerous products for the cattle sector of livestock production that's high magnesium mineral, high magnesium protein tub, high magnesium whatever.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is a lot of our cow calf operations, again, calve in the spring, have pairs out on forage um, to provide the nutrition for lactation. Um, some of the work coming out of New Zealand, a lot of grazing dairies. We have an even bigger issue there because we're really pushing milk production,
Yeah.
and that milk is requiring a lot of that calcium, a lot of that magnesium in that situation. And so, try to find and I'm not saying it doesn't exist, try to find a high magnesium sheep product.
I asked
And
this
there,
morning. I went to pick the mineral up, and I
did you find
specifically
one?
no. I
Okay.
specifically asked, and they didn't know anything about that.
Yeah.
So,
And
I mean, that's
the
just our
frustrating
local
thing,
little feed mill. But
right.
it
The
might
fr
it
even
might be worth researching and see if you can find something.
yes, even on the World Wide Web, try to find one specific to sheep. And the reason I say that is because all of the cattle items have that copper inclusion.
Yeah, that
And
excess cost.
so I'm not going to test and find out, like, in a 12-hour period
Hmm.
whether my ewes are copper deficient
Yeah.
and they could handle some intake of copper, because then I've got another issue.
Yeah.
Um, I've got dead sheep
Yeah.
from copper toxicity. So wanted to play it safe there, and like I said, I think for a bad situation, the um, standard operating procedure or emergency operating procedure there is what it felt like. Um, worked. And so again, that relationship there, and certainly being ready for it, just knowing it could happen would have saved me some stress. Um, because like I said, I could have gotten the magnesium, that Maglax
Yep.
over the counter from distributor there in Ohio. Could have, Valley Vet carries it, PBS Animal Health carries it. And
Hmm.
again, it's technically off-label use, but um, is an over-the-counter product. And I could have delivered a higher dosage of magnesium through that product as opposed to the CMPK gel
Yeah.
that we chose to use. Um, and why did we choose to use it? Because it was sitting on the shelf at Rural King and wasn't a whole lot of money. So they were open and I could get it that evening. Um,
Yeah. I ordered some through PBS, and they had a disclaimer on there that they were running behind. So
Yeah,
it may be 4, 5, 6 days before they even ship it.
right. But I
So
would,
definitely want to have it on hand.
yes.
And I think
And I
another
would
takeaway
assume,
from this is don't just open that gate and let those sheep go. You need to get out there and
right.
watch them.
Well, and that was one of the things that, again, that state vet, or I guess she wouldn't be the state vet, but veterinarian working at that university
Mm-hmm.
office. Um, you ask the question, okay, well, how soon? It was her suggestion to pull them off of that pasture and feed a dry forage into them.
Yep.
They've got mineral in there, water in there. Another treatment, just offhand here, that um, found, I think it was through South Dakota, I believe. Um, you know, magnesium sulfate. You know what common household product
Yeah.
that is in?
What's that?
Magnesium sulfate. Do you know
No.
what household product that's in?
No.
Epsom salts.
Oh.
So they had even mentioned mixing that into the water trough. Um, Again, and that was through South Dakota's extension program, and that was a cattle uh, example. But I thought just was interesting. You don't realize where magnesium
Yeah.
is everywhere till you
Well,
need
that's
it
all
and
fine and
can't
good.
find it.
That's all fine and good, except those sheep weren't drinking any water.
Well, exactly, and I guess more from a treatment standpoint.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I had asked how long before I can put them back out on pasture, and had mentioned to her, that is a loaded question. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really, it's just if you can wait until you have more vegetation, maybe some more mature vegetation out there. And her comment was put them out there with the round bale. Um, my issue is I doubt that those sheep will eat much of the round bale
Yeah.
when they've got that lush forage available. But I think we get everybody treated on the right track and full mineral. Get them back out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think we'll be okay. So
Well, that's good to know. Well, we're coming up on our time here, Cam. So, any last thoughts?
no, I think really more just on the importance of educating yourself, knowing common symptoms in
Mm-hmm.
sheep, and uh, maybe common issues you're going to face, and then know when to look for it.
Yeah.
So, early spring, you should know that this is a potential issue that you could run into, and it certainly is not a. I hope people don't listen to this and run home and shut their sheep back up and wait till their forage is 36 inches tall,
Mm-hmm.
because they're past the risk
Yeah.
of grass tetany. Um, but again, knowing what it looks like, knowing how to combat it, how to treat it, and how to move quickly through those um, protocols, I think that's the real takeaway of all of this.
Well, good. So, well, we thank you for listening to the another episode here of the Grazing Sheep podcast. If you've got a topic you'd like for us to discuss, send me an email at bigtomperkins@gmail.com, and we'll do a little bit of research and do a little talking amongst us, and we'll come up with some answers for you, maybe. And so be sure to go on there and follow us, because that helps us out there, so we know who's listening and who's not. And so it's been good talking to you, Cam. I hope to catch up with you here pretty quick.
You too, Tom. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye now.